Hello, Amy.
Hey, John, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Well, I've read the beginning of your new book, so thank you. The book is Know Where the Status Quo Ends and You Come to Life. So we had a few questions which have come from this book. I'd love to learn more about it. I'd love to hear about the model and understand how this works. So can you describe the model to me?
I can, yeah. The main way that I think of it is it's two forms of control that come together, and it's really the control in itself is being asserted so that we can identify our place in the hierarchy. And in most cases, we're not even aware that we're asserting this type of control, and we might think that it's power, but the model thrives on that. And the problem with the model is we truly can't see it in action in our life. And the status quo, as is said in the title of my book, is something that we actually try and defend without realizing it as well. And that's what keeps it rolling and the model rolling. So essentially put, the model is a form of control, and we posture in ways to assert that I have a place and scrap kind of for a shred of love, even though that's kind of an extreme way to say it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, so presumably the model has benefits. So how does it reward us then?
Well, it's a temporary reward. It's the same idea as what people would say is making a list and checking off boxes, a little bit of dopamine, but the reward is short-lived. And the truth of it is it serves no one. So that's a problem, but it's there. It seems it serves some people because they have the higher ed end of it now. I know more than you do, John,
Mhm.
right? We hear this in conversation quite often. And the truth of it is we dismiss that you know best for yourself. And and I'm not pointing a finger at you, John, but in humanity, if we had been raised to understand that we know best for ourselves and had that autonomy fed, natural consequence come that we play out and live, we wouldn't be in this trouble that we're in our world. We're seeing the highest levels of narcissism, and we're truly at a precipice of the breakdown of it. And that's why my work started, as I was questioning that some 25 years ago.
Mhm. So it's really interesting. Has the model been created by an organization, by people? Is this organic or is it deliberately constructed?
Well, that's a great question. And I feel that the closest thing I can say to answering that is that it really is about the hierarchy. So the model is fueled by the hierarchy, asserting that some have no consequences and others have far too high of a consequence. And a result of that is those who have no consequences are at the top of the hierarchy, and gone unchecked, they set the tone for society and our world. So they are creating the status quo. And that's why we hear people say, well, that's just how he is. But or he's a proud man. And I'm not trying to beat up on men. This is also in women,
Mhm.
and others, they, they, them. So the issue there is, in truth, that we are willing to stand behind and hold up this false hierarchy and model so that we have some place in it. And that's the problem in it completely, is we are constantly aiming to move higher in the hierarchy or hold our place in it. Well, I have this beautiful house, I have this education, or whatever it is that we're using to believe that we know for ourselves, when in fact we're posturing to show we do know ourselves when we don't really know ourselves at all.
That's really interesting. So people at the top of the hierarchy, then, are we looking at people in power, the rich, the famous, or is it more subtle than this?
Well, it can be more subtle. I mean, I'm from the United States, and it can be in corporations. You mentioned who's doing this.
Mm.
It could be something we can't see that's saying this is safe and it's not, but they're trying to get money or make money or pull that over on people. But it is people that we would say are in power at the top or have a lot of money. but actually it's not power. Power and control are not synonymous. And we often say that in our world. And that is also something that drives the status quo when there's no truth in it. We need to identify this is control and this is power. Power to me, I was in Africa in 2009, and I was in a city that was having my president, Obama, walk or be in a parade. And I was among the people of this town. And Obama decided to walk, even though the Secret Service told him to stay in the car. And that's power, because he knows it's more important to risk something and show the people, I'm here with you. I am you. I am just a human. And look at what can be achieved in our world, instead of being, I'm too important, I need to be in the car, right? That was an act of power on his part to humanity. He is shown walking among people on the streets in the United States in a parade, or he's a person to be with the people.
I think that's a really good example, actually. So take Obama and the way that he behaved, and then the same peer group, equivalent presidents. Would two people on the same level have different access, different uses, different effects by the model as well then?
Well, correct. And I'm going to take us full circle to the results of my work, which surprised even me when I was writing the book. So I spent 22 years observationally researching how to collapse narcissism. If one could, how would one do it? And I did that watching people in my life that were close to me and older than I am. They didn't really play to their highest level, even though they were highly talented and uniquely talented people. And that troubled me, because I knew I'm coming up into this and what will I do? And I did the same thing. I didn't play to my level of ability. So I questioned that. Why don't all people thrive? And then shortly after, it turned to, if one could collapse narcissism, how would they do it? And in 22 years of that, and then 3 years in writing the book, what I came to find about 2 years in is the result of my work is natural equality. And that's the change, is when we move into natural equality, which if we really are going to do it as a world, in a massive way, it's going to require that we know ourselves. And I'm working on defining some terms of insular individualism, meaning we aren't letting anything in and we are not accepting other cultural ways. We're not open to anything else except for this individualism. But then a connected or collective, I'm going to take collective out of there, connected individualism, which is more this, I really so much understand myself and know myself in truth. I've become very quiet as a result because I don't have much I need to impact. And that, we might say, fluidity or ability to flow through situations where people are upset or so on, shows something very different to our world. But within that, natural equality comes. And a person who is in this insular connectivity or connectedness understands there's not somebody out to get them, and there's not something that is beyond them, but they do it by knowing this is for me and it expands me. And that doesn't. That's the simplicity of natural equality. Now, I'm going to say this because I think I need to, is our world is prone to saying, it's a trend. Oh my gosh, sell that phrase. But we can't apply it right off the bat. Some people probably can in certain areas of their life where they don't have any trauma and their inner child is healed. And that's a real foundational piece of my work, part of the book that you haven't read yet. So not fair. But that when we heal the shadow, or the parts that we reject about ourselves based on inference or experiences we had in our youth and in our formative years. I know my inner child, even touching base with a 21-year-old was important. So it can be older too. But when we clear that shadow, we stop resisting massively. I mean, it's quite powerful to see how much more we trust ourselves and we come back to what we know is true. And then dealing with our ego, really, and that is control, and looking at what am I controlling and why, and experiencing we're here now to the distance of what that means to be fully letting go of control and moving into that power. And that's going to be unique for each of us. Now, the importance of this is that if our world expressed on our individual uniqueness at the full extent, all of the problems we'd be having would be gone. And that sounds super pie in the sky, just like saying, does this expand me? It sounds very spiritual. But what I found is I was in the spiritual for many years. My first experience being when I was 7, in my early 20s, it came hot and heavy and became scary by my late 20s. And then instead of saying, this is a gift, this is amazing, I shook my fist at the, let's borrow a word from the Irish, fecking sky. And I said, are you kidding me? If this is what I'm to do here, you better tell me how it works, show me the foundation, and help me understand the foundational pieces so that I know what's going on and why, right? I wasn't going to just say, oh my gosh, this is so amazing, right? I don't feel that way about it. And I came to see things very differently as a result. So I feel we are moving through what is spiritual into our exalted humanness, which is expansion. And that's unique because I haven't met anybody that said that, but I see the pattern building, and that's my skill set, is being adept at seeing how patterns build and then being able to see the future pattern that would be forthcoming, right? So, yeah.
Can everybody achieve this steady end state, this climatic new paradigm, or is it only the highly sensitive people that you talk about in your work?
That is a great question. And I believe that the first people that will be able to get it more quickly will be the highly sensitives. And in part because they're hurting the most. So they're most prone to looking for connection and not understanding why they can't get it through the people and places that created, I'm going to say, the trouble for them. I think a lot of highly sensitives came to see the other side of it, and they felt different in their family or in their office setting because they see things differently, and they're actually the greatest change makers to change it and put it into place. Although in my work, I say all of what's come before isn't your fault, but it is your problem now to solve. And I also say with a highly sensitive that what's good for the highly sensitive is good for all people, but what's good for all people is not good for the highly sensitive, meaning that signals to a statement of logic that they are the change makers here. So to answer your question, John, I feel that they will, coming into what my work is, be able to set an example without having to teach anybody how to do this. So when people ask me, I say my aim is to change completely how we think about psychology, which is pretty bold to say. But the reason I say it is I think after a few generations, once this is clicked with what this really means and how good it is for our humanness and for ourselves and our life. And I kind of don't like how I just phrased that, to be honest, because I want to be careful. This isn't like, oh my gosh, this amazing thing. It's tricky, but it's so simple. It's kind of ridiculous, but it's tricky to put into your life. That once those generations have gone through, it will replace the status quo with this expansion of humanity. And to me, the world will play nice together without any effort in doing so. It will do away with having to look at, we need to be, some people have said to me, we just need to be kind to everybody. And that actually doesn't play a role in my work at all. We will know I'm drawn to this person. I need to communicate with them. But a lot of our problem and why it's complex is because those people at the top that set the status quo in place didn't have consequences. We are emotionally immature in our world to a degree that's concerning to me. And that's the source of our problem, yeah.
So what's the model going to do? I mean, the model presumably has existed for a long time. It must have been challenged. It must have been through dynamics of populations, generations, and so on. What happens? How does it reassert control? How does it strike against those who would seek to uproot it?
Well, I think that's what we're seeing in our world right now. We're seeing the epic breakdown of what essentially is the model of recognizing that control in this form serves nobody. And what control does is it oppresses somebody else so that we can feel better then. And the reason we're doing that is when somebody has been mean to you it's because of their own insecurity or their own failure. They're not owning what is theirs on their side of the table. So they're trying to fling it onto you. And I had a deep dose of that as a child and in my years being married and so on, which was kind of a beautiful thing for me to see the landscape of how this works and why. But we don't, in my book, I talk about cathexis, which is obsession. And part of the trouble is we don't really have a definition of love that's true. So if we're looking at this as a whole package with that emotional immaturity, without having consequences, we don't mature. And we know with children who don't have consequences, they act out more and more and more until they're teenagers, and they act out in such a way that could be dangerous. And that's exactly what we see on the world front is people that are in the most powerful positions are acting out. And if we really look at it like children, but the world is parenting some of them. In my country, for sure, I see several countries that have parented this person. And as a result, that person has come back into line and said, okay, I'll pull this back. And that's exactly what we need to do. But that's the degree to which it's nearly embarrassing how poorly we have missed the mark on having natural consequence. In my work, I would say natural consequence is a facet of what we deem is God or this higher supreme thing. And taking that out of the mix is defying what is our true birthright. And I'm not here saying if you're an atheist or an agnostic or you are highly religious, that doesn't play into my work. You can still have that. It's just you will have to free yourself of forms of control within that. And I'm sorry to say, but in many religions, and there are some scholars in the United States, religious scholars who have said, in essence, these orthodox, not saying orthodox religion, but these extreme ideas within religion are an abuse model. You don't have to like that I said that, but I think that those words need to be uttered to start recognizing that just because you can't see it doesn't mean that others are not.
So the more intense dogmatic elements of organized religion and so on then.
And it's convenience. We see maybe politicians doing things that are convenient versus being like Obama and being powerful and saying, I'm here to serve the people. I had a friend 30 years ago, a distant friend, but he said, in the United States, the people who are politicians should take a vow of poverty. And when I looked at some point years later to be able to be in, to serve us, right? So that there's nothing else attached to it than serving the people. That's what they're there and paid to do. But President George Washington had to kind of not beg, but solicit to get firewood to keep his home heated. To work for his money. I mean, work for what he needed, kind of saying, I'm doing this for you. Can you give me fire? But he had to actually ask for it. So that was being of service and saying, I want to stand behind this country idea, right? And John, just to take it a little further, we say things like that they're a model citizen. This is the model by which we should live. And in my book, I write about how a school teacher, and then the next day, this person that I was driving by and so on, I realized they don't want the same things. And I thought, why am I getting that hit inside of me? But it was to tell me we don't all want the same thing. And we probably don't even know exactly what we want because we're so aimed at the dart or the bullseye of security and certainty. And that does not expand us.
Sure. So again, those materialistic societal driven goals that the model expects from us.
Yeah.
So are there differences between what's expected and what can be achieved by breaking free of the model between generations with different age groups, different positions in society? How does this affect the individuals or the broader groups rather?
Well, I think it would be wise to talk about generations based on your question. And I do see in each generation, there's an imprint of something that they're bringing to us. Like with my children, they're in Generation Z, and I see in them very clearly, I think they're going to rip down not in an aggressive way. I think that that's kind of strong, but they're going to reevaluate our health system probably across the world and say, this needs to be better and we're not going to put up with this, right? They also are a generation that I say is a sex explosion of identifying and understanding the true depth of who they are. And I'll say from my experience and observation that people who are transgender, I don't know many people who are, but the two that come to mind that I've been able to kind of walk alongside a little bit, that they had to go into such a deep, that insular connectivity, or rather individual connectivity, that they understand themselves so clearly. And I think that that's why they're blasted at so harshly, is they actually know themselves, and the people blasting at them know nothing about themselves. Do you see? It's a projection.
Yeah.
So I believe, and the millennials, I see them as a force of, we want an office right away. We want these things. And it seems sort of entitled in certain pieces, but they're saying, respect me in a way. And what I really think they're asking for is natural equality. That if they are the intern in the corner of the ER and the doctor is saying, this is what needs to happen, and the intern has learned something new, that the intern can say, I'm going to challenge you and say, I think that this might be something we should consider. That's where we have this natural equality, is the doctor isn't saying, well, but I'm the top of the hierarchy and you shouldn't challenge me. I've had a myriad of doctors tell me, I didn't know my body. I'm wrong. The test results that are off aren't what I'm saying is the problem. They're saying no, and I think, wow, I don't even factor into the mix. I'm just a piece of paper really to them. So when we're looking at that, if we collaborate and change that, I think that's where we become strong. I'm going to tell a story that's in the book, which is about Daniel Kish. Poor Daniel Kish. I don't even know him, but he's an American who went blind at 13 months old. He was a super physical kid, climbing, loved to move around, right? And his mother did not hold him back. And when he became fully blind, she knew to not disrupt him, meaning she let his knowing of who he is and how he operates be. And she watched him pull a bookcase down on himself, and she watched him bash his teeth in 2 times when he was riding a bike.
Ouch.
But Daniel Kish taught himself how to echolocate. And kids at a young age, naturally, that are blind, start clicking. And I never knew that, because they're told to turn it off, because society says that's not okay in the model, right? It's not acceptable. But Daniel's mom didn't do that. She said, go ahead. And Daniel would say, he did say in his interview, I lived a life similar to my peers, right? And so the difference is, we can look at Daniel as, I might say, I have a friend who's blind, and I say she's insighted, right? You can just tell. But with Daniel, I would say he's living an alternate experience. He's not disabled, not one bit. He said, I like going to a city I don't know. I like, that's powerful. It's a very different way to think. And that, if we all did that, if we all solved our own issue through consequence, that's what happens, is these new things come along, and we will work better together in the world, right? We'll collaborate instead of steal data or steal things. We'll share, because we know that expands both parties or all parties further.
But I think that's fascinating that he was chided for clicking, whereas one of the methods of using the white stick is to create a tapping sound that serves as the echolocation as well. So I'm going to guess, would that be maybe the fear, the embarrassment, the out of the normal that the mother was feeling in that case?
Well, but the mother didn't. She allowed it. She didn't tell him.
Sorry, of a typical blind person then. And
That's right.
this is why
that's what I'm putting together based
different.
on the research I've done, is it was disallowed. And that you had to go through the channels of what perhaps sighted people said, this is what works best. Well, how would we know? And if you don't allow that, I mean, in a way, it is Daniel created his world in a beautiful way. He created what he needed so he can hike hard hikes. He can do the things that he loves, right? He doesn't hold back. and he's not afraid of the consequence, even though he might not like the consequence. But exactly that is when we say no, or the teacher and the woman that I drove by saying, this isn't the life I want, and yet I keep living it. They don't question and say, how can I take the movement forward or the risk to change that so I live my life
So
inside my marriage?
yeah, you have this one example. So is this now being rolled out as, a method for blind people to adapt then to use this as echolocation? It seems if this is an undiscovered facet, something that can be taught, that can be learned, that this should be a method for education.
Well, okay, so I'm glad you said that, because what happened for Daniel is, and this is what I understand, is he was asked, you've got to teach this, or told, you've got to teach.
Yeah.
But that behavior in itself is aggressive, and it's from the model, you have to do this for us. And what I understand is Daniel stood back and said, I don't know that I want to do that. And that's how we know it's true for Daniel, is it's for him. It's not necessarily for others. And then he thought about it and he said, okay, I will teach this to others. And the other full circle with this is people learning this now in his business, they could be athletes. And what I understand by research is we take in 80% of our stimulation through our eyes. So if an athlete can do what they're doing with their eyes closed and still navigate the terrain or whatnot, they might be faster. They might be more, like, they change how their brain, like, they're strengthening things. That's my belief, is that things will change as a result of something like echolocation, right? And Daniel must have a great personality and fun, because the tagline for his business is, our vision is sound.
Very good.
I know, it's
Very
great.
good.
So I think that's how, and you've met people who do something because they believe in it and they're the only ones. I'm an example of that. I believed in this for so many years, and people said, you're awful things. You're a late bloomer. You're ahead of your time. Are you sure? Go be a psychologist. And I thought, no, I think I need it without any influence other than the ones that come my way. To keep it clean so I can see what I really need to see out of this.
This is really interesting because the brain is elastic and plastic. So take London taxi drivers who have to learn a very large geography. They have to pass the knowledge, a test to say, do you know every road in London and how do you navigate from one point to the other? If you scan their brains whilst they're working, there's an area which is enlarged, which is associated with locations, physical connections between geography. And then when they retire, that area of the brain atrophies, it gets smaller again. And I feel that anything that you do, there are certain areas of the brain that start to expand, that start to grow like a muscle. Does this apply to the highly sensitive people as well? Is this a muscle that's been flexed, that's been trained and developed?
Well, that's a good question. And there is evidence through, the person who coined the term highly sensitive person is Elaine Aron. She's an American. And there is a correlation to having a different type of nervous system, like that it is different. I'm just going to say that. I am not a scientist, so I can't speak to these things except for what I've read and understand from research. And that's minimal. My work really was observational and watching patterns in society, watching people and situations play out again and again and again. So I believe that the highly sensitive, my sense would be that if they had their brain scanned or tested while they are operating their daily life, they probably have more empathy, right? And we hear this term empathic, and I actually am sad to say, from my work's perspective, we have created empathicness as something that is a disservice to us. It's kind of a victimization. I'm an empath. That's how people say it. And the truth of the empath is in what I said earlier, which is what's good for the highly sensitive is good for all people, but what's good for all people isn't good for the highly sensitive. And that second part is what the highly sensitive empathic person that's saying, I'm an empath, is living in a circle and a cycle, but they need to live the first part. They need to
And
step into that role and be the change maker.
is this where you were saying in your work that you were second guessing life then? And is that second guessing, is that inherent to HSPs then?
Well, yes, I think it is, because we are also processing a lot more information. So in
Mhm.
a room, a highly sensitive could leave the room, and it depends on their sweet spot. There are 27 attributes based on Elaine Aron's work. And some highly sensitives have a few that are very strong or have all of them, but we're more adept. And the reason in the book, you haven't read this far, Jon, but I correlate it to, we are the elephants of humanity. The elephants are built to be in the jungle. And when the shit goes down, okay, sorry, naughty word there, that they can sense the earthquake is coming, or the water, or whatever, or the people, and they run on the land, so all the animals can feel those elephants moving, and the animals will follow them, and they trumpet in the sky, and all the animals up above can know to get to high ground or over here or what's safe. That's part of the problem, is we feel constantly like, oh, traumatized by our world, because there's so much happening that is defiant to how we are built. But that's where we can get into it and actually create something powerful that changes it. So I don't know that I'm fully answering your question, but we are here to signal. And the other thing is, we're altruists by nature, many of us.
Mhm.
So we aren't going to take others for granted. We would make a human chain and drown while people are climbing up us. That's extreme. But because we want to save humanity, it's how I believe many of us are built. We so much want to see every human thrive. Like, look at my question when I was a kid: why doesn't everybody thrive?
And
That's weird.
presumably, the model, by its definition, does not want everybody to thrive. It does not want everybody to be equal. I mean, whilst these highly sensitives are ground stomping and trumpeting, the users, the upper hierarchy of the model must absolutely hate these people. Are they punished? Are they put down? What happens to highly sensitives?
Yes, I think if you speak up, and I want to really make this clear, that I think that one of the beautiful things is, right now, this sounds kind of funny, but the energy is on our side to speak up.
Hmm.
It's time. And like I said, people said to me, you're ahead of your time and so on, but now is the time. So we need to speak up now. But yes, in the past, I can't tell you how many times I've been put in my place or told that's just not the way it is, or you don't understand, or and I think it wasn't, people weren't ready, but the hierarchy and this wedge of control holds it so that these people that are at the highest levels are constantly in a state of, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this, but they're not willing to admit it, because they have the certainty and security of being on top. But that
Hmm.
means nothing in the scheme of things, when the truth of it is, we want to be among the people who are going to expand us the most. That's what's going to feel best. And that's what truly serves the world the most, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, so you talk about a process to reconnect and restore knowledge. So this is kind of following on from there. How is that? Is that like a total reboot of a person? Do you modify? Do you change over time? How long does it take? Can everybody do it?
Well, I do think everybody can, but everybody won't, not in my lifetime. And this is something that will be placed. I think that people in my age group, which is Generation X, are probably going to be keen on it, because we were a kind of a lost generation of, you're going to raise yourself. You might even have raised your parents. I think that's common for our generation, right? And that was no accident. We've come with a heap of responsibility. I remember being 8 years old and feeling that I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. I also, at holidays, could say something to one of my relatives that would kind of tease everybody and be mean. And I'd say a short statement and they would stop it. And I remember after maybe the third holiday where I had done that, my mom said to me, "How do you do that?" And what I was doing, which I didn't know, was I was stating something that was true and knocking off the control in that person and parenting them like a mama cat biting them in the neck and saying
Mhm.
no more. And then they could calm down and they could stop projecting. They were like, "I'm okay. Amy's saying I'm okay. And now I don't have to bite others in the neck or, get at others to project my insecurity onto them." It's awful. Then I felt like I lost it a long time. Okay, John, I'm getting away from your question. Sorry.
No, but that's good. No, I mean, I guess it's been the point. I was going to ask you, are there challenges along the way? And this seems to be a really good example of that, that it's not immediately clicked into place. I'm this person, I've become this person. It's still a growing, developing kind of an evolution, is it?
It is, and each person, it's an individual experience, but that's where we move from insular to connected. And the thing that I say in my book is everything that it took to get you to where you are today, to this part where you don't want to be, it will take that degree to unfurl it and move back to who you really are. So for some of us, like I had a steep journey, even in utero. I'm not going to talk about that here, but so I came in hot, like literally
That's
very
a video.
another video. And I think that would be interesting for people if they're interested in my work to hear that journey, because it is sort of interesting to see it from a different perspective. So I could then look back and say, okay, it's no surprise to me that it has been just as intense to come out of it as it was to get into all of that intensity. But the beauty of it is we are at peace in the end, because we recognize that was so necessary for me to understand my uniqueness and come out fully. And in my journey, I had to let pretty much everybody in my life go. And that was, it looks bad, but it's also odd to feel like, how do you, how do you do that? How do you not necessarily have a support system? But the beautiful thing is then new people come in. We know that that's just what happens, right? But they'd be stronger relationships. But for years I was like, bring me sisters, bring me, so that's the trick in it, is if you've had a really intense unfolding in your life to get you really trapped up and what do I do? You're going to have the other side of it. And in another conversation too, John, I think it would be worth talking about the two sides of the model. I think it's too much here, but that really helps to pinpoint the highly sensitives fall into one side of the model.
Great.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting, because it seems like it's almost like a catalytic reaction, right? So you're at one steady state point. To get to another way of life, it needs energy, it needs input to get up and over before this path starts to follow its own rate. So does everybody do it?
Well,
just because you want it, do people drop out? What happens along the way? What about those who fail?
Well, we're all in it. We're all in the control model. We're all in that. So, but there are people that break free. And I think it's worth noting in my work how years ago I was at a class and they were talking about something completely different, but some concentric circles of this is, and my mind just went, boom, this is the thing, is when we have fear, and that's when I say we start here, we won't self-express. And we have to move through vulnerability in order to surpass and move into self-expression. And that's why I say the energy is on our side. If you tried to be vulnerable with somebody who was in this one side of the model that was maybe more aggressive, you couldn't move into self-expression. You couldn't move into the vulnerability. They would not let you. They'd project on you and hold you down back into fear, to project their fear onto you so they didn't have to carry that so much.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not saying, you're carrying all these emotions. It's different than we think. So that now we have this really open ability to move through vulnerability and into self-expression. And I believe a lot of people, before I keel over, will move into self-expression. They'll clinch the vulnerability. They'll find people where they can be vulnerable. They'll have support. They can ask for their needs. They can have them fulfilled. And then the next piece of that pathway is for many of us too, we'll go through kind of what I call as a blind trust. And it's really about letting go, even though you can't see anything. So you're having this experience with what you know is true, and you're trusting. And I hate this term because I felt like my friends were saying it to me for eons, but trust the process, right?
Oh, no.
Gross.
No.
Right? So I say to myself instead, courage is the pathway to freedom. Courage is the pathway to freedom, right?
Yeah.
So after that, remember fear, vulnerability, self-expression. That's great. If you get to that point, excellent. And if you don't, it's okay too. But then you're going to just be grinding in life probably though. But then we move into trust, and then we move into fulfillment. Once we figure out the trust. And when we're coming into this knowing what we know is true and it's real, it tends to circle and cycle, meaning we, like a stone that's cut with facets, will clinch a facet that's small in a circular pattern of like, now we're back at the beginning. And then we're fine. And we're like, I got this clinched. And that's where you see people saying, I know exactly how this works and blah, blah, blah. We know that they're posturing in the model when they say that, because when they really fecking know it, they will say nothing. They'll know it for themselves and they'll be calm within that.
Nice.
So in my work, I say, instead of having gratitude and forcing it in a journal, ask yourself, I'm here, and why am I not having natural gratitude? Let me go through the unfolding from here to here to have that. And sometimes we see things we don't want to see, like that relationship isn't healthy for me. That boss or that company or that job that I'm doing, I've outgrown it. I have to leave. We sometimes see difficult things about ourselves. And that's where I think people hesitate and say, but I'm okay. Because the people of the world are hurting, I believe, a lot. Like, we need a mom for the world, albeit a hug for all y'all.
And then is this, so the fear with so much individualism and so much self-expression is, does that take us towards anarchy? Or are you saying this is a much more natural, calm, inclusive resting state?
The latter. The anarchy, that's why we hesitate to move out of the fear, is we think all hell will break loose.
And that's model talk in one of these uncompleted facets.
That's right. Or I will get out of control, or it will get out of control. And a lot of people on the more aggressive side of the model might feel that way. I will get out of control. And I'm afraid of that. Like, I remember I'm from a state in the United States that has like everybody's 50% German. Not true, but almost. And so I say, it's like the animal shelter, everybody's half black lab here. Everybody's half German here. And then a whole bunch of other things or something else. But a psychologist told me many years ago, the trick for that Germanic culture that's come here is we still have it inside of ourselves that if we start fighting, we will fight till the death. And the fear of that being out of control, I mean, I'm putting that second part in, is within us. And it won't be out of control. But again, if you had a life that had a lot of extraordinary levels of abandonment, rejection, so on, and you get to the point now to say, I'm going to free myself and be who I am, there's a lot to that, right? And you might need to do some meditation and do these things to move through. But eventually, when you come out of it, you're literally free, and you won't need a regular practice or you'll know when to sit and be quiet. You'll know, and you'll do it once and you're fine. You restore quickly because you're with yourself. So there's not as much energy output.
It seems that you have to go through tough times and pain to discover yourself as highly sensitive, or to begin that change to become individual.
Well, right. I just think that the highly sensitives, that's why I didn't say, I mean, I did talk about high sensitivity, but I don't talk about it a lot in the book, because I feel like there are also other people that are not highly sensitive who this work applies to. And again, their only journey is to reconcile with the vulnerability or work through that and find where they can be vulnerable, because they have to change, in psychology, we'd say this, a pattern in order to have a different experience, right? In order to change how their life is, we have to change who we're with or change the environment. And those are parts that, yes, there's a breakdown. But in another sense, Jon, if we're all doing this, I see it more in groups of people, if we're doing this at a time, and then that group figures this part out, and then this other group of people comes in and does it. And I'm not saying like, come to a retreat I'm saying it's just happening in our world. There are definitely groups of people cycling through some of these realizations and having things break down. It's heating it. Otherwise, you're stuck in that pattern of the circle where you're not understanding and you're not moving to another facet. You're not getting the lesson. You're not getting the natural consequence to say, boy, I keep addressing this relationship and nothing ever changes. It's not working for me. I need to.
And are there geographical variations that you've come across as well? So different countries, different continents, as well as the kind of generational and individual elements that we were talking about?
Absolutely. Although it definitely points to a few things that are synonymous for every culture I've been in, but I've not been in every single culture. I've traveled a bunch, you know.
Mm.
But yes, and I think I'll use this little example. When I spend a lot of time in Eastern Europe, and for chunks of time, like a month here or, you know, a few weeks here. And notoriously, when I'm being taken to the airport by the cab driver, if they're 50 and above, they had some influence and experience in their world of being under communist rule. And so for some reason, education-wise, they must have learned more about philosophy. So I'll say to the cab driver, because they always ask, why are you trying to elect two old men into office, or what's going on in the United States and so on? And several years ago, and it's 2024 right now, but I would say the country is maturing, and I'm from a young country. And I think that's an important thing to denote, because a lot of the countries I'm in are far older, right? And so the only way to mature as a nation is to expose our hatred, because if you can't see it, you can't change it. And so they will think about it a minute, and then they say to me, we have the same thing going on in our country, and here's how. And so I think that there is a harmonizing situation there. And now what I see in our world is we are really, really breaking down that hierarchy. And I know that it's hard to hear that I'm saying a hierarchy isn't the thing, because we think, well, hierarchy has to be in a business and has to be, but actually not. I mean, I know some managers that are clients, and the reason, or directors, or, you know, the reason they're so successful is they look at each individual that works for them with this potential of giving them the opportunity to excel and expand in their own uniqueness, but they guide them in ways that make that really true. They support them in ways that make that really, truly expand, without saying, I'll give you $2,500 and then you tell me what you can do. It's not that trick of the model. It's, I see this in you, and I do think you're the one that should speak at that event. Even though the director probably should be the one speaking, they'll yield to that because they can see it's good for everybody. And that's the difference. Yeah.
And I guess as people go through this process as well, you know, you've just described that work example, but you would have had friends and peers presumably trying to get you to reconform with that model. So don't shame the family. HR processes at work is the most extreme. Stick with the marriage. Are these are common kind of warning flags, red flags along the way, are they?
They are. I even, in my book, I write about, I had people say to me, how can you leave your children? And I would just calmly pause a minute, you know, a second, and then say to them, I raised my children to be very independent and capable. And I know and trust they've got what they need. And I'm just a phone call away. And that would shut them down. They would say, oh, right, my kids, they've got it. They know when they need us. And honestly, they don't need us too much, because they know how to navigate their world, right? And they are
giving them more autonomy, hasn't it? It's painted to those friends that there is a different end state apart from stick with the marriage, look after the kids.
Right. And there's a lot of shame in leaving. And that's the beauty of my work, is I got to experience that all at a really intense level, because I'm a deep feeler. And so, you know, people that have done things like I've done bring something new forward, maybe say, if I can do it, you can do it. And I'm not going to say that directly, because I think that's kind of, but the degree to which I had to dig in was perverse. I spent years walking on a fine line of, should I just opt out and not be here, because it was almost too much for me. I mean, it was really, really hard, egregious. So I did do that, and I did find my way, and my life is expanding now. But people have done this before, John. They knew, I'm not going to live by somebody else's standard. You know, Mr. Bingo, your countryman, he's from England, and he is, you know, he's like, I mean, on his emails, he'll say, buy this fucking thing here. You know, like, he's just really irreverent and who he is. And I think people do this. They do launch out of what is the model and be themselves, and unapologetically and powerfully. People love him, right?
Yeah, very much so. And I think we're looking for different kind of celebrities, different kind of influencers, you know, and I'm using those two terms deliberately because as these people become more individualistic and break away from the model, is this why we have kind of a culture of shutting down the influencers, making a mockery of celebrities, dragging them back into the fold, do you think? Or is that something completely unrelated?
Well, right. I think prior to now, we would, Mr. Bingo, we might say, we don't like him because he's free
Mm,
and he can't be dragged back into the model. He won't allow it. He knows not to. But I do think people with a lot of money in our world have been the most powerful voices. And when I talked about the cab drivers and saying that they'd say this is going on in our country too, I'd say in my country, I don't feel like people have matured emotionally past the age of about 16 years old. And
mhm.
I said, if we were to put in a monarch, we would hire or put in the Kardashians, and it shows of our valuelessness. It
Yeah.
shows how we don't have a value system that actually is about humanity and people, but about things and having a perfect body and all this, and being a shining star. And the truth of it is, I don't know, I'm not a follower of the stars, but I do notice once in a while, Keanu Reeves, he walks among the people. I notice in England too, it seems like people that are famous just are out and about. They're not protecting themselves or having to put a barricade around their house. And to me, that's showing that they aren't afraid. There's a vulnerability there, and people then respect that. And they probably are they're outside of the model or closer to that than these stars that are starlets that are, have the compound and are protecting themselves and have the 18 houses and all the shiny things. I think that is they're very much in the model, and they might think they're not, but because they seem to have all the what they perceive as power, but it's actually control. They can control things with money.
Yeah, but they've become trapped by the
Yeah.
process as well then.
They
And I think,
exactly good, exactly. You're caught on there. Yep.
but this is where I think is one of the points that you've made in the book there. So you were saying the more that you adhere to the model, the less trust there is in the individual.
Exactly.
So are these two elements incompatible and incongruous concepts like magnetism, magnetic poles? Or here's a question, why can't the model self-reinforce itself by affording trusting self to those who do conform? So could this be achieved if the model was to empower ever greater material rewards or greater and greater outcomes?
Yeah, I feel like I'm gonna maybe answer it from a different direction, but
Please do, yeah.
part of it is when what you're saying, I think of Daniel Kish's mom. I think her name is Pauline. I'm sorry, Daniel Kish, if it's not, but I think that's what it is. And I think of my kids, and I knew the most important thing is to believe in them. And when I can't, I deal with myself behind the scenes on my own
Hmm.
and restore that. Right. So I come from here to here, and
Yeah.
that's none of their business because that's my issue. And then I tend to have the question that I need to ask them, or I tend to show up in a way that is conducive to what's happening there. But our belief in them affords them the ability to skate through and trust themselves. And then about a year ago at the holidays, I could feel inside I need to turn that belief I have in them away from them and turn it back to myself. And I had 2 weeks of tears because I'm a mom. And that's a tender, troubling thing. Like, I believe in my kids. But what I came to realize after about a month of kind of hanging around with it and looking and dealing with it behind the scenes is they already know I believe in them and they've got this. They've
Hmm.
got it in themselves to believe in themselves. So I don't think that the model plays any powerful or positive role in our world because it's telling us and defining for us what the right life is or the good life. I mean, I've thought about, and sorry, now I'm going to be bad here, but I've thought about, I would love to speak at universities because this is a place where we're really starting to launch into what is the hierarchy and the model. But I'd
Yeah.
have to say to kids, if your parents said, come here and do this, I'd recommend two things. If you feel like you have something really big to give in the world, you might just scoot through your, undergraduate education, as we call it in the United States. I know it's a little bit different in Europe, but get that completed.
Undergrad, yeah, same.
Have it, yeah. And then you have it. And if you decide to go further with your big idea and you need your master's or something higher, you already have that foundation done. But if you're unsure, why are you here? And that's okay. I'll be the mom to tell you it's okay to pursue other things. And the people, I mean, because when I was traveling, I stayed in a lot of youth hostels and so on. I mean, sometimes with 12 women in a room, I would talk to young women, and one woman was from Wales, and she said that she keeps going back and working at the movie theater. And I said, so why aren't you working in film? And she said, well, oddly, the town that I'm from has a massive film industry. And I was like, why don't you go and work at the damn coffee cart there? Like,
Yeah.
get in there and start talking to people. And she thought about it, but I think that she knew to leave school, and she was going for law, and she was going to a really good school in England. So she's really quite smart, but she knew this isn't for me. And that's what we need to heed, is we do know inside. And as soon as we start derailing that, that's why some of us have lives that became so wound up, as we kept saying, nope, I'm not going to trust that. I'm not
Yeah,
going to
and
do it the way.
it's this expectation, isn't it, of you go to school that you don't want to go to, you go to university because everybody else does, you've got to find a partner, you've got to get married, you've got to have kids, and then you've got these burnt out individuals sitting at home with kids running around the place or driving them off to after school sports and so on. And surely they're thinking, wow, how did we get into this? So again, that's a model live and well right there then, is it?
It is. It is.
Mm.
Yeah. And it doesn't serve us. It's not that people do want kids, and they do, but we should have the choice to be able to do what we want and how we want to do it. But that's not meaning we assert, like, I'm staying at home. When we're proving something, that's a sign we're in the model. When we know it for ourselves and we keep it quiet, we know it's true for us. Yeah.
And this kind of accepting that everybody feels that that is the only path.
That's
School,
right.
married, kids, yeah, okay, I get you, yeah. So okay, so as you've moved on then, so tell me about this new phase of life. Are you fully there? Do you feel it's truer? Has the model pushed back? Have there been consequences?
There have been a lot of consequences, but I do think in my journey, I was, when my youngest went to college, we dropped him off and I came back, and I am also intuitive. I'm clairvoyant. I can see, a premonition, and I had a premonition in 2021. And if that's hard for you, it can just be a visual of a series of pictures that I was a cedar tree, and that some of my roots were gnarled and some of them wanted to grow, but they couldn't, they were small. But this big tree, and it was to uproot that tree and take it someplace else. And a few days before I flew out, after my son went to college, I was headed for 3 months to travel in Europe, and then to New Zealand for a month. And there was a tornado that hit our yard and uprooted a tree that was enormous. And I thought, boy, it's right there, right? What an interesting coincidence. And so I took off, and then the signs filled in, right? I was in Wales actually, and I saw this giant cedar tree. I didn't see it right away, but I went down to this kind of scary area and I saw it, and I said, I needed to see you, right? Just little signs along the way. And so I think that started to let me know I was on the right path. The other thing that it gained for me is, where I wasn't parented as a child, boy, travel really knocks the heck out of you. And I think travel's pretty fun and wild. And I mean, I had a person ask me to marry them. I've had it all, right? A 9-hour flight, man. But the point of it is that I let myself out and to be seen when I'm traveling, but I would kind of laugh when the airplane was going to be 3 hours delayed, and I'd say, this is teaching me something. Or I got to the airport an hour and a half before the flight. I said, oh, I'm just going to go because I think I'm breaching a visa for the EU, right? And then I had to figure out, how does that work? I may have just lost a $1,500 ticket. That's not nothing. But I knew the whole point of that money and that experience was to teach me how to grow up and how to let go in a way that everything would work out and be okay. Fears, would I get to the airport on time, or the flight that's at 2 in the morning, or, so that was just a good training ground for me. And it also gave me the freedom while I was writing the book. It was resourceful because it was less expensive for me to travel like that than to live in the US. And I would have probably been biting my paw off, feeling too stagnant being where I was. So the point of what you're asking and what I'm saying is, when you write a book, it heals you. There's a massive process of processing your things. The travel helped me process a lot of things I never was parented on or could learn. I mean, no offense to my parents, but so that's a lot of what clinched the degree to which I am back in my knowing and back to who I am, Jon. And I've met great friends around the world, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is beautiful for me because I love people. I'm really curious about people.
Yeah, and this never would have been possible if you'd stayed in
No,
your lane.
no. And I tried in 2018, I went to Sweden for 2 weeks to see friends and it wasn't received well, even though it was agreed upon. When I got back, it wasn't received well. And I think those were signs this isn't a working experience. And then look at what happened. The money came available for me to sneak away money to publish the book and to travel and do these things. So, even though sometimes it was a little bit squeaky and I was definitely scared, not about travel. I never felt threatened while I was traveling, but about life and securing my own future, or creating that. I had to believe in myself and trust blindly and know it would come. Yeah.
Sure. So I guess the last question, if you had to give one example or one realization of where that status quo ended and you came to life, where was it? Where was that cutoff mark? Was it a single point or was it a transition?
Yeah, I would say I'm still a little bit in process because I have more books in me and I know that will process a little bit more. And when you look around in the world, everybody is in that status quo, in that control model. And so it's hard to be completely outside of it yet for me. I think in my career actualization and fullness, that will be clinched for me. I do have to say this, the one area of my world it is clinched is I could see in the summer of 2022, I had a premonition that was about love and the future of that. And after I saw what I saw, for 3 months, I kept that with me and processed it. And that's where I put cathexis in the book, or obsession, versus what I call eternal love. And the idea there is, once we're in the state of understanding eternal love for ourselves, we want not for it anymore. We know it's like, we actually can feel it's already there. And that's an area that was powerful for me because I feel I got married young because I was so hungry to be loved, because I didn't experience that in my formative years in a way I could understand, or maybe I just didn't experience it at all. I'm not sure my siblings did or didn't, but I'm guessing maybe not, So, so here we are. I think that's one area where I understand myself and I know what that means. And I know if I meet that person, I will know, because I've seen what that means for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Good.
part of my journey is to go home. And when I met my editor, that same week, I met 4 people named Beth, including my editor. And we had a conversation and she said, "Do you know what Beth means?" And I said, "No." And she said, "It means home." And I thought that's it, is I didn't feel not at home, but I never fit where I'm from. Exactly. It didn't really make sense to me. And I definitely can tell that's the aim, is finding that.
And so where or what is home then, Amy?
Well, right. It is a state inside, but I feel that there are places in the world where maybe I know I feel that more than other places. I'm not going to share where because that's private and personal, but
Just like a zip code would do, A
like a
house
what,
number,
Jon?
a house number, a zip code. We want that level of detail, yeah?
That's right. No, I'm not letting you in that far. But I definitely feel differently in places that I know are signal home to me. And I don't know why. I don't necessarily feel like, oh, I love that place or that's the greatest place. I know inside that's where I will be. And I don't know why or how, but I know I will be there. Yep. And there are
Very
2
cool.
places in the world that I really feel that, and a third that I think I would spend some great time in. Yeah. Yeah. So
That's really nice, Amy. Yeah. And I think that probably rounds off all of the questions that I had for you today. So thank you.
yeah, Jon, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.